So good evening. This is now part 2 of the timing chain tensioner replacement because that Febi one failed. So what I did is, this is now the cylinder head, as you can see it, where the chain tensioner mounts to. And what I found out is, what I didn't show you in the first video, was when I pulled out the Febi one, they had a second gasket over this gasket here. And this gasket is solidly on there. This must have been the original one. And what you also can see in the video is that there is a filler in there. So what they did is they screwed up the threads when they inserted the Febi one. And they couldn't get it to not leak. And what they did is they used the second get of gasket. And you can see this. This is the oil outlet, which goes into that area which I showed you in the other video where this needs to match up. And that's where this whole thing started. Now the problem with this is, when you have two gaskets on there, the whole chain tensioner comes out ways too far. And that will alter the amount of Newton meters of pressure against the timing chain rail, and that will alter the whole behavior of the timing chain. That's where this started. And so the problem I got now is, I put it on to see on my new one, to see how it works. And if I didn't put my new gasket yet on there, I just matched this up with this here, and I ran it through the old original gasket. Of course, it is leaking. The lower bolt I can tighten to 25 Newton meters, but the upper one is pretty much gone. So what I'm going to do is, I'm going to carefully re-thread this straight in there, and then I'm going to use 2 new metric bolts, hex heads in these cases, because they're easier to work with, which are going to be 2 or 5 millimeters longer than the original ones. If I have enough room to go in, I'm going to measure this out. And then we're going to, now I got this here. I didn't want to go as far as I did. That's okay. Let me just see if I can go back here a second. Let me just see. We should be right here. Or is it further back? No, here. Well, anyway, there we go. That's the picture we wanted. So we can see this. So this is basically where the whole thing started, is when they replaced that old original timing chain tensioner. So that timing chain was changed. This part is Febi, and I suspect that the chain I got in there and the upper rails, which they replaced, including the guide rail, is all Febi stuff. So on the weekend, I will take the covers off and do a complete inspection again on those. I did this when I got the car. I have the videos up on this. And the chain looked okay. I didn't look further at the tensioner. And the issue started with the tensioner when the temperature dropped down and it got cold. And that's when this thing sort of gave out of me. And what these tensioners do, and now we need to go to the theoretical part, when they fail. Let me see, here's my thing. Nope, yeah, no, that's it. So here is our chain tensioner, the internal workings of this thing. There's quite a few parts in it, and I do not know, and I don't think that the Febi part has as many parts in it as the Mercedes-Benz one. You can see this nicely. There are 2 springs, a preload spring, which pushes the ball in here, and then the main spring. And what this does is, there's this orifice here, what you can see in the back here, where this oil goes in, and it fills this cavity with oil. And that is actually an oil, a hydraulic tensioner, really. That's what that becomes. When it is first empty, the spring will do or provide the initial tension. It would happen on that Febi part is that the oil part started to leak, not externally out, but internally. It would lose the pressure between these 2 balls, and it would have virtually 0 spring or resistance against the rail. And then when you crank the engine over, it will bump this all the way back from the first top dead center you reach on any cylinder, whoever is going to be the first one, especially on the right-hand side, on the passenger side, that will bump this whole thing back, and that makes that pling noise. And that pling noise is similar to when you start a car and your starter hits the flywheel. If you ever had that, you get that real sharp metal against metal noise, which lasts for a second, maybe two at the very most, but it's usually less than a second. And this is the same thing here. And now, of course, I'm not getting any oil pressure into the new one because of the leak of the old gasket and the loss of the tension of the top bolt. I was able to tighten the bolt up, but once it got warm and the head started to expand, that bolt became loose, and you can turn it almost out by hand now. So it was a pretty poor repair. So this is a two-fold system, a two-part system basically, spring-loaded with a pressure release system. When the oil pressure gets too high, the ball will open up and will release some of the pressure back out, and then new oil comes in and it reestablishes the pressure, so it keeps this chain pretty much under full tension. It's a highly precise part, and that's why they are fairly expensive. I think their retail price, their listed retail price, is over $400 for this part, and I was able to get it for $280 from Mercedes-Benz of Durham in North Carolina. They had it in stock and they were able to ship it out to me. And I showed you the box. It was made last year, so that's a new part. Interestingly enough, they still have the 116 number, I believe, on the part itself. They never changed this part where this is embossed on it. So that still is the old one, but that is already the newest style. And here in the manual, you can see the differences in it of what they changed internally between the part numbers, even though this lower part has the same one. So you can tell, even though this has the old part number on it, you can see by measuring the cap on it of what that actually is. And that cap can be removed. This is tightened on with 90 Newton meters, but this is a non-serviceable part. So don't even think about trying to rebuild this, because you can't. There's no parts available. And it says here on the bottom, note, in event of repairs, replace complete chain tensioner, because they're not serviceable. The only reason is that this is a threaded cap on there, which has 90 Newton meters on it, is that for the assembly, basically. But it cannot be altered while it is in there. And let me just show you this real quick here. This is the other cylinder head, and you can see this. That looks a little bit different in shape than from what I got. But it is basically the same principle. So the oil enters here and then goes over here, and it provides the oil flow out to the system. So this is basically these channels internally in the engine, and then in the head from where it comes down, where it goes out, and where it goes around it. Some of these things that gets really confusing for someone who has never worked with a Mercedes-Benz manual is this manual covers the 116 and 117 engines, all four versions of it. What they had, the 3.8 liter, the 4.2, the 5 liter, and the 5.6 liter, because they have all these common parts and there's very little differences in them. But this could be a picture which they have posted, say like from 1981, when they had the 3.8 liter engine, and you got a 5.6, which was manufactured after 86 to 91. Then this will look somewhat different than what you see in the picture. You will see the similarities, and the same here in this picture. This can get very confusing if you buy a manual and they tell you this is for a 1987 560 SEC, SL, 560 SEL, or what have you. And then you look at these pictures and that doesn't fit my car. It is not the point so much as it just is a exemplary. These pictures are mostly exemplary, just to give you an idea. And the other thing is I wanted to show you is, so when the timing chain is replaced, what I have seen now on YouTube with most videos is that most people who do this themselves, you can see how grainy this is. Let me go a little bit out. You can see the timing chain. This is your right hand head, and this is your left hand, driver side, passenger side. and the chain comes over your cam sprocket around here, goes around here, comes back up, goes over the other one, then goes around here, and this is your crankshaft, and that's where that big nut sits on there, which holds your balancer and that pulley system. And then you have here a lower guide rail and here a lower guide rail. And these two guide rails are never replaced. You can see people, they're pulling this pin out because you can grab this. This is the chain tensioner rail. The chain tensioner sits here on the side and it pushes against the top of the thing, pushing this, keeping this chain under tension. And the way you can jump the sprocket is down here. When there's too much slack in it, it will basically jump on the top, usually on the left, because that's where it can jump. Everything else is then basically pulled in under tension to begin with. And then we have a rail here, a plastic rail over here. They're usually replaced, and the plastic rail over here. So you have 3 plastic rails and this here, but these 2 are never replaced. And I talked to Mercedes-Benz over here in Kansas City at Aristocrat Motors, to Ethan, and he asked one of their master technicians over there if the timing cover, as you see it right now, can be pulled off while the engine is in the car. You have to remove basically the whole assembly. You have to remove the pulley with the balancer. That big nut is basically coming out. You have to remove your front seal. You have to remove the alternator with the air pump on this side. The air conditioning compressor has to come off, and the power steering pump has to come off. The distributor has to come out, and the distributor is basically driven off the sprocket system here. And so is your hydraulic pump, which is on here. So the SLS hydraulic pump, these 2 holes are for your water pump. So the water pump has to come off. And then the big challenge is, you can see this faintly here, this black mark I'm following along underneath the cylinder head. That is the cylinder head gasket on each side. And down here is the upper oil pan gasket. And you can get this probably off, but to get this back on while the engine is in the car, it's going to be a dance on eggshells. This is really for an absolute pro who can do this, because these 2 rails can only be replaced when you have that cover open. You cannot reach them. There's just no way to grab this and to align this with the holes properly. There's no way to hold this. This one you could get to from the lower oil pan gasket. And then there's another chain around here, which they're not showing right now, which is for your oil pump. And that also has a guide rail on it, but that guide rail can be changed from below when you remove the oil pan. The lower oil pan, there's 2 oil pans, upper oil pan and lower oil pan. I do not think that you can remove the upper oil pan because of the steering stuff underneath and the drive stuff. That won't come down, but you can reach the oil pump in this area here partially from underneath when the oil pump is replaced. But because this rail sits behind the chain, there's just no way of getting it. You might be able to fiddle-fuck around and get this one here out from below, but I would doubt it from my experience. I have replaced the front seals on those engines, you know, with the bolt. And I had a Japanese-made impact wrench, and one pull on the trigger counterclockwise, and the nut was loose basically without even moving the crankshaft in the counterclockwise direction. It just went that fast. So if you want to do this, it's not very difficult to do. You just need the right tools for the stuff. And that brings me back to this is the actual chapter here on replacing the timing chain in the Mercedes-Benz manual, covering the models for the M116 and M117 engines. I think that started in 79 to 91, because the process and Newton meters and everything else is about the same. And what they want you to do here is they're giving you the idea. This is how they suggest to cut the procedure for cutting the timing chain the link off. And this is the temporary link. and marking this and this, that, and the other thing of what they want you to set, and then complete the engine. It is very, very simple. This is how in basically 1, 2, 3 pages, Mercedes-Benz explains to you on how to replace the timing chain. And if you have looked at this here, and you can see all the different engine models. You got the 968, this is the latest one here, the 963. And then you have the 116, the same story, what they need and what the offsets are and what they want you to do. So they start, remove spark plugs, and then remove rocker arm on right-hand camshaft. That's the passenger side. That is in chapter 05230. And if we go here, 05230 is right here. Let's see. Here it comes. And this is the removal and installation of rocker arms. And they want you to take out the rocker arms. And the reason why is because you're going to have a backlash when you pull that in. Every time one of the 4 cylinders reaches the top dead center, it has the tendency when that the Nockenwelle, the egg-shaped thing comes around, and it hits that rocker arm, and it is right there, and it could tip back, so it could go backwards, and that will pull your chain back. And if you have lousy cable ties, what most people use to hold the chain in place on that sprocket on the passenger side, on your right side, then this whole thing will like bounce, like it goes backwards. And this is the actual tool, what they're showing us here, what you're seeing here in the picture. I got this. This is the, what they call the spring compression tool. This here, spring compressor for valve spring, that's what that is called. So I got this today, and this is from Baum, and it basically goes in and it hooks up from underneath, and then it pulls the whole thing up, and you can pull this out. And I got this already because I want to do the valve clearance check, which is this tool here. And this is another very delicate part. You can see this here. I'm going to zoom this in here. There is a mark here. You can see this. There's a very, very, very small ring in there. And this thing, when your valve clearance is absolutely correct, that sits right in the middle. And if it is too far low, then you're in the minus. And if it is down here, it is in the plus. And they have in the manual is a guide, and it will tell you, you have to then take out the current shim and see what the next size up or next size down is. And that is something I'm going to be looking at too, because that's how you adjust the automatic, what do they call that thing? Well, for the rocker arm assembly here, this is this part here. Number 3, hydraulic valve clearance compensating element. They couldn't have found a more, you talk about a 25-cent word. I'm going to show you this, number 3, hydraulic valve clearance compensating element. And on that thing, on the other side here, zoom in, this is number 8. And then number 9 is the thrust piece, and the valve seat ring is thrust piece retainer, and that thrust piece is basically the one where they adjust the height or the clearances of it, and that has to be adjusted as the valve age. That will give you just a short idea. But to recap this here, on my timing chain tensioner, that's the first thing here. I have to first of all fix the thread situation, get the old gasket back off, and then I have to take off the head and see what else we got going on there, and then inspect that chain. Again, I said that the Febi, these are probably all Febi parts, and I'm not a fan of this, as you could have seen in video number 1. And I would think that the chain is probably of equal, lesser quality, and so are the rails. So this could cause potentially more damage than anything else going with these cheap parts. So I may change the timing chain out depending on how this is going to go on the weekend, just to be on the safe side. And I'm going to change definitely the upper rails and the rail here, because from that malfunctioning tensioner, we may have some damage on that guide rail, and that means that the alternator just would have to come off. That is much easier to get to because the alternator is only on the engine block with 4 screws, and then you can take the whole assembly off and you can get to the pins, which come out fairly easy. I got the correct pin puller for this. That is fairly easy. The other side, the left side, is a little bit more involved because of the power steering pump with the fluid in and everything else. So that would require draining of the fluid out of the power steering pump, disconnecting the low pressure hose, and then removing it and putting it to the side securely. So you can go to these 3 or 4 pins on that side as well. But it is all pretty manageable. So this is the task at hand, and this is what that looks like when people do a repair. I was really surprised because I took that Febi, like I said, I took that Febi tensioner off and I didn't see this, and that second gasket was on there and it fell off. I thought, oh, that was easy, and then I didn't realize that they had 2 gaskets on there. And then of course that hole here, that oil hole, was halfway plugged up by that second gasket. I will, on the conclusion of this video series, when I get this back working correctly, I will make another video. Then I will show you on the Febi on how they had that second gasket on there. And like I said, this is not a fix because this has a thickness and the other gasket has a thickness, and that will offset your chain tensioner out and reduce the net pressure against the guide rail, the tensioner guide rail or tensioner rail. Yeah, have a great evening, and I will check in with you probably over the weekend, or if I get this done here sooner, what I would like to, so I can drive again, then I will have a video of this part here, tension repair, hopefully tomorrow, maybe on Friday. We will see how things go, what happens there, and we're gonna be good then. Don't buy any Febi parts. Spend the extra money. It's not worth this kind of stuff to deal with. I guarantee you this. Unless you don't want to drive the car. That's at least my personal opinion. It's always easy to criticize other people's work. You know, first you got to do it better and correctly. That's the main thing. And we're getting there slowly but surely. You have a great evening. And thanks for watching.